Welcome to Module 2 of Clarinet. Today we're going to talk about articulation in symmetry. So symmetrical action of articulation, which means we're not only talking about the hit, we're talking about the rebound, what your tongue does after it touches the reed. This is very important and I think it gets glossed over sometimes. But before we do that, we're going to do a brief overview on the way your tongue moves when you talk. This is a fascinating bit that is different for everyone. So one of the first things I learned as a teacher was to never assume that someone else's tongue does exactly the same thing as yours. We all learn to talk. We're amazing autodidacts when we learn to talk. We imitate and we make it work. And a lot of times different languages will set us up to do different things better or worse. So we always want to be aware of any physical limitations on the way your mouth is built or any lingual tendencies. All of that makes a big difference. So I do a lot of question and answer with my students, and I ask them to find out what their tongue does so that they understand better. The first thing to realize is that instead of just referring to our tongue as one object, it's a huge muscle actually. We're going to talk about the front, the middle, and the back of the tongue, okay? And we're gonna go through a few syllables to start off, and I want you to think about what your tongue does when you say those syllables. I'm gonna talk about what mine does, but that is not a right answer. That is my answer. And there's a quiz where you'll be filling out your own. So we're gonna start with E, A, I, O, U. And you wanna think about the front, middle, and back of the tongue, the direction of movement it's going, and the engagement of the jaw and chin. So for instance, E, for me, tip of the tongue is a little bit higher, and there's minimal jaw movement, E. And it's not going forward a lot, it's just a little bit. When I say A, there's more of it going up, more tipping up, A. And I have more lip engagement, A, and jaw engagement. My tongue actually goes down a bit. O, it stays low. O, and U. Lips come forward, U. And again, this can be different for you. So I want you to try this and think for yourself. A lot of times you'll read in books that you need to tell your clarinets to have this position and say this word. Well, there's a problem with that. If we go back to these syllables and we say them at 3 different inflection levels, we'll find that they're actually quite different. So I'm going to say E, 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 E. Very different tongue functions. A, I, O, 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 U, U, U. So it changes based on the inflection. So if we're telling our students to say one thing, we don't know how they're saying it. And it's a little too variable. So a lot of times I'll tell my students to focus on the change of pitch, and that helps. So if we think of like a vocal siren, it tends to do that. Sorry if that was surprising. And the tongue tends to come up and back. So you want to try that for yourself. Sometimes if that doesn't have that effect for a student, I'll ask them to think of a yawn. For me, my tongue goes up and back. Some people, their tongue goes down. You can also think of like a cat hiss by sucking back, and sometimes that'll bring the tongue back. But what we're looking to do is bring the middle and tip up and back. So, all right. When you did your reading, you might have seen that we had a whole exercise on da. There is a reason I prefer da to ta, and you are welcome to disagree with me, but I find that ta has a sharp end on it. It's kind of like a ta. Flicks it forward and adds some tension, especially when we get into tut, 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 tut. All of a sudden our jaw and our tongue are both tense. So if we think da 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 da, it's a little more like speech, and the singing resonance of it in the Russian off exercises really helps us to just do instead of overanalyzing. As soon as we try and throw our tongue at something, we're overthinking and we're forgetting how good we are at talking most of the time and how easy it is for our tongue to enunciate between each and every word and several times within a word. So we need to use that natural skill of our tongue and focus on the resonance. So da is a great way to unlearn built up tension. It's a natural singing stop instead of a dot cut off stop. A lot of times if a student is playing a note and they don't like it, I'll ask them to sing it da and see how they stopped it. And I ask them, where do notes go to die? And it's usually not that you just stopped the air or you closed your mouth, but it seems to go down. Da, down to that diaphragmatic pressure. Da, and that is a much easier way to stop a note with resonance. So I find da to be very useful. But is it my favorite articulation syllable? Actually not. I've done a lot of work with Michel Gingras' exercises for jaw motion and had a lot of success with students. So we're going to go over it really quickly right now. You're going to let your jaw hang open, kind of like your mid-yawn. And then you're going to practice saying la 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 or da la 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 la. And watch your tongue. If you keep your jaw open a little bit, you can actually see it. La 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 la. What I ask my students to look for when they do this is how far down their tongue is going on the rebound. It might be going la 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 la, which is going to cause a lot of changes in our tone. So we want to keep it a little stiller and use less of a fulcrum. So if we use a lot of our tongue, then a lot of things are moving. If we use less of our tongue, less things are moving. Okay. So after that, la 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 la. Now we're going to try saying some things. The very first thing, and this is for flexibility of the tongue and releasing tension, you're going to say, this is fun. So it's not going to sound great, but it's going to be understandable. You're saying, this is fun. This is fun, without moving your jaw. And then you're going to say, clarinet is not hard. Clarinet is not hard. And the last thing you're going to say, I like to try new things. I like to try new things. All looking into a mirror and watching for jaw motion. And just like that, if you lead your students through this, you've also brainwashed them. They now think it's fun and they think clarinet's not hard and they like to try new things. Well, maybe. Good luck with that. Okay, so when we're doing that, the goal is to get to a point where we're moving just the tip of the tongue. The actual tongue is high. And li is actually my favorite articulation syllable. D also works well. T is just a little abrasive on the front for me. I don't want them to think of slapping the reed. I want it to be just a point of connection, because the sound actually starts after the tongue releases the reed. And so what our tongue does after has an incredible amount of influence on how the sound happens. All right, one thing, if my students are really not understanding what their tongue's doing after it hits the reed, I'll ask them to reverse T or D and say eat or eed. And for some reason, turning it on its head helps you think about the rebound a little more. It's that symmetry of the motion. We're approaching it from the other side. So if you've never done that, I encourage you to try it. Now, some other things we're looking out for tension in our articulation session would be the jaw motion, which kind of looks like chewing on the reed, and it resets the embouchure each time and creates a lot of inconsistency. And a lot of times on big attacks like accents, you'll get squawks. But another thing that can happen if you're getting kind of fluffy articulations, it means you've got that bunchy chin happening. I like to call it raspberry chin. You can see it in there. And so instead, Michelle Gingras has another exercise for us where you get to look in a mirror and practice moving that chin up and down. And at that point, you find that the chin motion is actually more your lower lip pushing up into your top lip. If we try to just move our chin, it's really hard. But if you think about moving that lower lip, it becomes really easy. And that's when we know that the lower lip is the source of a lot of our problems. All right, so that will help students identify that. And then we'll get to actual playing. So a great way, if articulation is a problem, if you've maybe noticed that they're anchor tonguing, which anchor tonguing means that the tip of the tongue is usually anchored against the lower teeth and they're articulating with the middle part of the tongue, which can cause some big problems in the third register, and it can also create some thwack, thwack, thwack sort of things. If you are just getting the thwack, thwack sound and you're sure they're not anchor tonguing, it's probably that they're not hitting the reed consistently. So there are a few steps I like to go through for students to improve articulation. The very first one is, do you know where you're hitting the reed? And do you know what part of your tongue you're using? And we think we know, but we don't always know that we know. So to get there, I'll ask them to use their finger and just put it in like the clarinet mouthpiece angle. And practice articulating on it. And then you're feeling both sides and you have a better idea. Then you try that with just the reed. So this is the same angle that it would be on the mouthpiece, flat side up. And then at that point, if I'm still not quite sure where I'm hitting on the reed, this is fun with your middle schoolers because they can't handle it. But one of the easiest ways to make sure that you're hitting the tip of the reed and that you have a higher tongue position is to stick your tongue out of your mouth, flat against the reed, draw it up tip to tip, and then put it back into the mouth. So again, that's tongue comes out of the mouth, flat against the reed, comes up to the tip, and then you put it back in the mouth. It looks like this. And at that point, it's a lot easier to get that legato tonguing. A lot of students go for just the hit, and we get a lot of sound and a lot of action. But if we go ahead and do that, we've already reduced the fulcrum. Instead of just going, okay, I have a low tongue, I'm going to find the reed and thwack, and get a hek, hek sort of sound on the front. So that's a great way to clean up articulations right away, in my experience. And if we're still having troubles, we can also work on darts. So I like to tell my students articulation is like throwing darts. If you let go too late, the dart just goes straight down. The air doesn't have a chance, it goes flat. But if we let go right at the highest point, or even a little bit before the highest point, the dart can still go up and away. So I learned this from singers, that actually using emotion with an action is incredibly powerful. It's embodiment. And so while I used to love to make fun of them, I have to admit it works, and I use it with my students and I love it. So you set up to play, you think of the frosty straw. And it really helps you to feel where the air is going and think of what our golfers would call the follow through. And that visualizes your air and sends it farther. And the air is really the secret to all articulation. Just like the picture in our slides of the champion rock skipper, the air is what carries it and what creates the sound. The tongue is really just separating. We focus on the tongue is creating the sound, but without the air, the tongue makes no sound. All right, so once we've got the basic concept down, we need to really stress legato tonguing because that's the hardest part. That's the part where the tongue is the most off the reed. If we're using short staccato, the tongue has to stay close, and fast staccato, it has to stay close. But long notes, it's got a lot of hang time. So we want to fill that hang time up with air. And sometimes long values are the hardest to do. So I'll start students with sixteenths or triplets and do a deceleration. And that'll help to keep everything still and really hang it on the air like a clothesline. Okay, so we're going to move on to playing with the clarinet. And another really helpful thing I find for students is to alternate air and tongue attacks. So we're trying to make the air attack just as definite as the tongue attack. We go li with the tongue and then he, li, he, li, he. And it's helpful to do this in the lower register. And that just shows us that the air is fast right at the beginning. Otherwise, students sometimes use a hua, hua with slow air at the front, and that will also create a not very lovely articulation. Thwa, thwa, thwa. All right, so we've got great articulation now. We want to improve our clarity and our speed, our endurance, and the variety of our articulations, right? You want a whole palette to work with. So when I'm looking for better clarity, a lot of times the first thing you can do is take something up an octave. And as soon as you can convince your students that they should use the same air for the low maintenance notes as they use for the high maintenance notes, it'll make a world of difference. I always tell them we have high maintenance people and low maintenance people, and it's a lot more fun to treat the low maintenance people like high maintenance people because they say thank you and they appreciate it. It's the same for your throat tones and the other notes on the clarinet that just come out without any thought. And it's especially true in articulation. So you can just take things up an octave, and we can also, if they are higher notes, do them without the register key. So all of a sudden, we have to be very specific. If the tongue is coming far away, we're going to get a grunt. Or even lose the note altogether. All right, the other thing we can do is articulate on partials. So the clarinet has the odd partials. That's why we overblow at the 12th. But if I play just a C, I can get those two other notes, which is the 12th and which is the E above that. So C, G, and the E above it. Okay? So if I add articulation on that, all of a sudden I have to be very accurate as well. Okay? So that's a great way to also teach your students to be more accurate. When we're getting the partials, we're starting like this. And then to get the middle note, we can't be squeezing from the bottom lip at all. I like to think of rotating just a little bit forward and then the highest note like that. So instead of the lip, the lower lip pushing up for the high note and squeezing, it's rolling just a little bit out and giving that reed just a tiny bit more space to resonate. All right, because what we want to do is find that fulcrum point on the reed, which is where you can still see space between the reed and the mouthpiece, and we don't want to be squeezing above that point with the lip. And if they can't get the partials, that might mean they need to adjust how much mouthpiece they're taking, which that little piece of paper we used before can come in handy. You can slide it behind. And that also shows you where that fulcrum point is. You put your thumbnail there. And that'll usually help to get a bigger and more resonant sound as well. Okay, so when we're working on speed, we want to actually start off the clarinet. The coffee straw is a great way to do this. So I might tell my students to start with eighth, triplet, da 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 da. And you can also do those off the clarinet. I can't tell you how much time I spent practicing Mendelssohn's Midsummer Night's Dream in high school without the clarinet, just. And it's very helpful because it helps your tongue be accurate and it helps it be light. All right, we can also use patterns. So a lot of times I will set the metronome on triplets, and then I can use a long, long, short, short pattern. And that means that each note gets a beat except for the shorts where I put 2 in 1 beat. Oh, here we go. Oh, that's not my triplet. Here we go. And this is called momentum or burst tonguing. And so I usually leave 1 beat off in the middle, and then put them together. And it's actually harder to do without the clarinet sometimes. And you can also do short, short, long, long. And you can do long, short, short, long. And that will also help you to control it instead of building tension. All right, so those work for your students, and a great way to also keep the tension from building is to do those exercises in the throat tone octave and the octave above the clarinet octave, and that'll make sure the air is engaged. We can also do endurance tonguing, which is just 4 measures of 16ths repeated, and then you take a break of 2 quarter notes and you do it again, and you're listening for consistency. So the next time your student says, I can tongue at this speed, you can say, well, how long can you do it? And that'll give them a good way to take the metronome back down and keep working on bringing it up. All right, the other thing I want to talk about, we have slurs. Changing the slurs around is extremely helpful in your scales instead of just doing the one. And also changing barrings. So that's the simplest version, which you'll find in one of your slides. It's just this first line. You can also do it in 5s, 6s, and 7s with different articulations, and that'll keep the tongue nice and light. I also love to work with tuners, articulating across different dynamics with my students, making sure that it's not changing as you get louder. The tongue wants to drop as you get louder. And I think I gave you all a mini assignment with your coffee straw to practice Midsummer Night's Dream.